welcome to another episode of the Atlantic Still podcast. I'm here with my board chair, Anthony Lanzilotti, who has a lot of experience advocating for the blind and advocating for himself. And we're just going to talk about issues that he's faced and that the blind face, and to get a different perspective from somebody with a disability. So hi, Anthony.
Hi, how are you?
All right, Anthony. So first, let me go with my first question, Anthony. Introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself and how you got involved in disability advocacy.
Thank you, Donald. My name is Anthony Lanzilotti. Been pretty much involved in advocating all of my life, as I've been blind since birth, missing digits on each hand, or both hands and feet. Pretty much I got involved with the National Federation of the Blind. Early on, I grew up in Philadelphia and moved to New Jersey, and I reside in Brigantine since 2004. Started my scholastic journey at Atlantic Cape Community College, where I transferred to Stockton, completing it this May of 2023, graduating with a bachelor's in poli-sci and criminal justice and liberal arts with a minor in disability studies. The goal is to go into law school and become an attorney, and further the advocacy work for, transcend the knowledge I've learned through the years onto others.
Awesome. So you're leaving Stockton with 2 degrees?
So the focus is poli-sci and focus poli-sci concentration in pre-law with a minor in disability studies, but my degree, singular, so I should have clarified. My degree will actually be liberal arts. So it's
I got it.
Cool.
I got it. That is a mouthful. I didn't know. See, I learned. That's why I like doing these interviews. I didn't know you grew up in Philadelphia. How'd you end up in New Jersey?
Well, parents wanted to move, and services compared to what I was receiving in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey is better. The commission, the NJCBVI, which is the New Jersey Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired, is the equivalent to which Pennsylvania has, which was OVR, Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. NJCBVI is much better. The services were just better all around, hands down. That was one of the big reasons and the big factors. And other than, wanted to change. And
yeah, and I think that brings up an important point. I think sometimes when people with disabilities move to a different state, no matter what disability they have, they should really look at the services in the state they're moving to compared to the state they're in, because the state you're in, America gives a lot of power to individual states to design what kind of systems they want to have and what they want to fund. So it's good to, like I said, if you can help it, do your research, because some people, I know I've gotten calls at the cell from people who maybe move and go, I expected to have more services in whatever state they're moving to. But as you know, Anthony, it doesn't always work out like that. Pennsylvania could look like a completely different world next to New Jersey. So I think that's a good kind of tidbit. So do you remember when you started? You say you were doing disability or advocacy your whole life, but do you remember when you started to kind of consciously think of yourself as a disability and consciously think of yourself as a disability advocate?
so as I said, I've really been doing it all my life, but to formally think of myself as an advocate, quote unquote, per se, probably when I began it in my scholastic endeavors at ACCC. And that was, just because, well, for one, it's, the college experience is completely different, from when you're in high school or elementary school or middle school. You've got to do everything on your own. And, it's a huge adjustment.
Yeah. And you first, we met first at ACC. We were both in ACC together, and you were able to create some systemic changes at ACC. Can you tell us a little bit about that situation and what you were able to accomplish?
So while attending ACC, it's pretty much had to educate the educators, if you will, so to speak. Everybody got an education. I wasn't receiving course materials in a timely fashion along with my sighted peers. In addition to, I was told that I was unsafe walking and navigating the campus without assistance. I couldn't be on the campus without an aid, is what was put to me. So I contacted my colleagues at the National Federation of the Blind, and at such time intervened on my behalf and litigation lawsuit was filed, a protest was put together, and the case resulted in a consent decree. And ACCC has agreed to come into 100% compliance.
Well, that's awesome. Good for ACC for coming into compliance, but that just shows the kind of change that people can make, and that there are organizations out there that assist people with disabilities. Because sometimes you're right, it's just a lack of knowledge about what people with disabilities are entitled to, and all you were entitled to was to have the same college experience as everybody else gets to have. And just to think about it logically, if you're a person without a disability listening to this podcast, how would you feel if somebody from your college, a teacher or a administrator, said you couldn't be on a college campus without supervision? That kind of defeats the whole point of being in college. Part of the independence of being in college is being able to go on campus and go where you want, so that's a very interesting thing. And I always tell people with disabilities, I'm sure you can relate to this too, Anthony, sometimes discrimination against people with disabilities is justified a lot in safety. I'm sure that's how it was justified to you. Safety, got to keep people with disabilities safe. But people think, oh, that sounds nice. What's wrong with safety? But like, people without disabilities get to do unsafe things or risky things all the time. Right. So people with disabilities should get to have that same right,
Sometimes they tend to subconsciously, without meaning to, subconsciously, they tend to take things for granted.
Yes, exactly. And people without disabilities have gotten lost on college campuses all the time too. Like, you think about it logically, all the stuff that people without disabilities have done on colleges, I'm sure outweighs the dangerous stuff that the blind or people with disabilities have gotten into. So were you already planning to go to law school before your ACC experience, or was it the ACC experience that got you interested in the law?
So I was planning to go to law school pretty much since childhood, and the experience at ACCC kind of just cemented that even more. Pretty much, I'll go back to. So as a child, I was if anyone's familiar with a medication called Bendectin. Bendectin was marketed back in the 70s, and it was used to treat, or it was marketed, I should say, to treat symptoms of morning sickness. However, there wasn't enough testing done in a typical situation. It takes the FDA typically 10 years to successfully market and develop a drug and bring it to market. Bendectin was introduced and put on the market in 17 days. So,
and this was in the 70s?
Yep, this was in the 70s. And the one commonality, all the mothers who were prescribed this medication, all the babies were born with some form of a birth defect. Now, all the birth defects weren't the same, but that was just the one commonality. And of course, I'm the youngest of three. I have one brother and one sister, and my mother, she only took that when she was, pregnant with me. So.
Wow.
Yeah. And it resulted in a court case, and to no success. I mean, because you're going up against a pharmaceutical giant. And right. So the first time was a hung jury, and we appealed it. The second time we lost, and but I just knew from early on that was what I wanted to do.
Oh, well, that makes sense. So you saw that, this is why we need lawyers and people to hold organizations accountable, especially people with disabilities. I think I read one time only like 1% of lawyers have disabilities. So when you get your law degree, you will be joining an elite group of people, and it's important because people with disabilities really bring a unique and necessary perspective to a lot of these situations, because oftentimes we're talking about issues, all issues involve people with disabilities in some way. Who better to talk about issues of personal injury or medical malpractice than somebody who may be has faced similar situations? And are you interested in disability law?
I am, and and being chair of the board of Atlantic Center for Independent Living, and just in conjunction with them, I work at NFB, and of course, it's short for National Federation of the Blind. And when you put it all together, advocacy with being able to live independently and just having, I think I'd sum it all up and just being able to have choices and to do what you want. And everybody, regardless of their disability, can and should be able and have a chance to live the lives they want.
Right, to make the choices they want to make. And I think that's a big thing that unites us. Tell the audience a little bit more about NFB and your work with National Federation for the Blind and sort of what they do and how you got involved.
So, National Federation of the Blind, they're 501c3. They're headquartered out of Baltimore, Maryland, and they have affiliates in all 50 states, including Hawaii and Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. And under each state affiliate, there's chapters and divisions, and they assist persons who are totally blind in all aspects of life, all the way through early intervention as infants, all the way up to seniors and everywhere in between, whether it's seeking employment, being compensated fairly when they do find employment, assisting them as they did with me when post-secondary education to see that things are on an equal footing. So there's, whether it's Braille, whether it's technology, whether it's advocating for accessible medical devices, such as glucose meters, etc. There's a whole host of things.
And they were very involved because when I attended one of their meetings with you, I learned they were very involved in like the beginnings of the disability rights movement with Social Security income and really getting that stuff started. We have these resources now, and there's still, as always said, there's still a lot of work to be done, but I don't think we sometimes acknowledge enough what has been accomplished. One of the stories that was told at the last meeting I went to was, you used to have a social worker, and if you were blind, go to a social worker and hope they gave you what you needed, whether it be a blanket or food. And, the idea that there would be a set amount of income that you can get, like that people with disabilities can get through Social Security, either SSI, Social Security income, or SSDI, Social Security disability insurance. It was a radical thing, and it took a lot of years to get there, and a lot of work by a lot of advocates. It just didn't pop out of the sky. So those are the things that NFB was involved in, and I think that's really cool. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, sometimes I feel like people who are blind and visually impaired all get sometimes forgotten in the disability advocacy world, kind of put in their own little silo. And one of my big things is, if we're going to be about all people with disabilities, we need to be about all people with disabilities. So I wonder if you agreed with that, could relate to that, if you think that kind of the disability advocacy world could do a better job incorporating people who are blind and visually impaired.
Absolutely. I mean, it should be inclusive to all, not just, to all groups, whether you're blind, deaf, whatever the case may be. I mean, it shouldn't, as you said, no one should be segregated into little silos. And I think a lot of that's just, people's breaking barriers, overcoming people's misguided beliefs.
And also, making sure that other people with disabilities invite other people with different disabilities into the group. Because, not that there aren't differences in the needs of somebody who's blind and somebody with cerebral palsy, but we have a lot of similar needs. We both want adequate housing, adequate transportation, the ability to work, all those good things. So it's important that we stay united on a lot of these things, because when we're separated, it's a lot easier for people in power to not serve people and to put one group against another. So I think that
one thing I learned early on, there's power in numbers.
Yes. It's all about numbers and leverage and your ability to pressure politicians or those in power to do what you want them to do at the end of the day. Because, I always say this, if you don't show up, and if you don't vote, and if you don't exercise your power, don't be surprised when politicians aren't paying attention to you and are paying attention to the people who keep them in power, because that's what it's about for a lot of them at the end of the day, unfortunately. Yeah, it's just really important that we keep that in mind. If you could wave your magic wand and change the policy, what do you think would really benefit the blind and visually impaired community or the disability community at large? If they made you king for the day, Anthony, you could change one thing. What would be the first thing you do? Any ideas?
Well, because there's many things that change. If I had to pick one, I'd start with Social Security. I'd start with the criteria. I don't want to say make it easy. Okay, easy is not the correct word, but I think I would relax it a little bit, because you're forced to jump through all sorts, as you know, all sorts of hoops, whether it's Social Security, whether it's education, whatever it is. But I think, I'd start with Social Security, then I'd work in
Yeah,
for a
I
little
agree.
while.
I agree with you, Anthony. I think it
And
really
because
starts.
here's maybe lack of redundancy. It's so that you're having to prove the same
Right,
information, especially when your disability is such where it's not going to change and
right,
it's so obvious.
right. Right. Like, how many times do you got to show everybody you're blind,
Exactly.
Anthony? How many times? I
Pain is
agree.
not a fashion statement.
I agree, and I think you're right. Just making it more streamlined and more easier to access. Also, I always say getting rid of a lot of these. People don't understand. One, it's very hard to get Social Security. I think a lot of people are under the misconception that you just show up and they just start handing you out
Yeah. Well,
money. They don't.
that's the thing I get. Like, oh, you're blind. Wait, you go to school and you go to college.
Yeah,
You're Stockton. You go.
yeah.
Isn't there all this assistance and all these grants to help you? Say,
Uh,
well, yeah, you can get financial aid like everyone else, or you can take out student loans.
right. That's a great point.
There's no
Anthony.
extra financing.
I know. Thank you.
If there is, someone forgot to give me the memo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. People think there's like some secret funding that people with disabilities get. No, if you do get Social Security, one, it's limited. It's not a ton of money.
No.
Two, if you get SSI, there are tons of restrictions. You can only save $2,000. You can only
Let's be
earn
honest. That money before you get it, it's already spent. When
yes,
you look at the
exactly.
cost of living, it's come on.
Exactly. Exactly. It's barely enough to get by. It's, and it just restricts you so much. So people should be able to work and keep their benefits without fear of losing them so quickly. And they should be able to save money. We should want people with disabilities to save money because that's how you move up, the ladder of economic success. I mean, it's ridiculous. Think about that. You can imagine you can only save $2,000 because you're on SSI or Medicaid. $2,000 is ridiculous.
Absolutely. And one thing now where we're sitting there having this discussion, all people with disabilities improved access to get what they need, whether it's a screen reader, whether it's a wheelchair, whether, improve their quality of life.
Yeah, that's a great point, Anthony. It is, and it's not easy to get these things.
No.
It's not easy to get the laptop you need or the computer or the screen reader you need. It's not easy. There are a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And again, the goal should be to encourage people with disabilities to be able to work and live the life that they want to live. So making it easier for people to get what they need and creating more mechanisms for people with disabilities to get their resources, I think would be really helpful. And like I said, when we design these programs, going back to Social Security and SSDI, why would we want to penalize savings? Why would, if you're on SSI and you get married to somebody else that could jeopardize your benefits because you're now becoming counted as one person financially by your income. So why would we want to disincentivize people for getting married? Why would we want to disincentivize people with disabilities for doing things that benefit them? So we got to really look at these programs and see what we're incentivizing. I always say, why do you want to make it so hard? Don't you want us to work? Work is good. Don't you want us to have families? That would be good for society, not just on a moral level, but on like an economic health level. So, I just think people can be very short-sighted and not think of better ways to design programs. The other question I had for you, Anthony, is if somebody was interested in getting involved in advocating for the blind or advocating for disabilities, becoming an advocate, what would you encourage them to do?
Well, there's many things. They could reach out to us here at the SIL, Atlantic Center for Independent Living. Go to atlanticsil.org.
Yes, exactly.
Where they could, if they're interested with the blind, they can go to nfb.org or our affiliate website, nfbnj.org.
And isn't there a South Jersey chapter for the national?
There is a South Jersey Shore chapter. And we represent for the National Federation of Blind. We represent the Atlantic and Cape May counties. Put my number out here if it's appropriate.
Yeah, go ahead if you want to.
They can reach me at 609-361-3038, or you can shoot me an email at tti777@gmail.com.
That would be awesome. That's awesome. And that's a great, I mean, I guess the simplest advice I can give somebody is if you want to get involved, just get involved and get
Right.
involved in these organizations and
You know,
show up.
select an organization or something that you're passionate about and just, do it. And then one thing leads to another. I mean, that's pretty much that's what I've done.
Right. And just show up, even if
Exactly.
you don't right away get something to do. If you just show up to some of these events, and eventually people notice you and start giving you stuff to do. Hey, that guy's been sitting there for a couple months. Let's give him something to do. What have been some of your biggest challenges as somebody who's blind? What have been, what are those things that people who aren't blind don't see, and kind of the difficulties and the everyday challenges that Anthony has to navigate?
And this isn't limited just to the blind. All persons with disabilities being able to become gainfully employed, seeking employment, getting what they need, whether it's through pursuing their scholastic endeavors. That's definitely a challenge. If they're going for post-secondary education, for the blind per se, depending on where you live, access to quality transportation.
Right.
If you don't have public transportation, you're pretty much
right. So if you live in a more rural area,
right,
you're kind of screwed, for lack of a better word. And this is why this stuff is so important. So it's just, I always like the word, there's kind of a disability penalty that society puts on you. Like everything is just a little more annoying if you have a disability, a little more annoying to get transportation, a little more annoying to get employed, a little more annoying. It's just like you have to do what everybody else has to do, and then you have to do it slightly better or slightly more creative to get what you need to live your life. But that's why advocacy is so important, and change can happen. And that's why I like to highlight the story ACC, not to have it be a negative, but you got a lot of great changes done there just by getting people involved. And what you did was, instead of just because you could have just said, you know what, I'll just deal with this. This is 2 or 3 years of my life. I'll just be supervised when I'm on campus, because sometimes it's like, look, I just want to go to school. I don't want the drama, whatever. But luckily you decided, no, I got to fix this. And now people who come to that campus now who are blind are treated a lot differently and given the correct support. So I just think it's important for people to think like that. Like, even if you're facing discrimination as a person with disability, and I understand, I get it, that the want to be like, look, I'll just get through this and go on with my life. But it's about the next person too. And we can only make the ADA and these disabilities laws work if we enforce them.
Well, that too. And I think a lot of people's misconception, once people hear, oh, so you have the ADA, doesn't that protect you? Well, not necessarily. The ADA, when you think about it, really look, the ADA is great, don't get me wrong, but the ADA is barely just hasn't even begun to scratch the surface. There's so much more to than just curb cuts and automatic door openers, etc.
And ramps.
Right. And ramps. Nowadays it's website accessibility, accessible apps.
Right. People are just starting to think about that. Like, oh wait, we gotta get people with disabilities want to use this stuff.
The law is never, what is it? The law is never proactive. It's always reactive.
And I always say
the law is always playing catch up.
And this too, Anthony, and I kind of said it at the beginning. Like, these laws mean, like, the ADA is just words on a piece of paper if nobody initiates a lawsuit or follows up with anything. Like,
absolutely.
If an organization or somebody is discriminating and nobody does anything about it, even though it's illegal, they're not going to just stop a lot of times. So people just think, oh, the ADA is out. They're not going to do stuff like that. But it doesn't mean anything if nobody puts the pressure. And like you do with ACC, you got the National Federation for the Blind involved. You guys had a protest, and you initiated legal action, and you were able to come to an agreement. And that is, you have to have there be costs for discrimination. You have to be willing to apply pressure. And we are very fortunate as people with disabilities growing up in this era when there are more organizations and more laws. But like I said, it doesn't mean anything unless we use it. So that's why I always admire your story, Anthony. 'Cause a lot of people talk about the system change and we got to change this and we got to do this. You actually did it. So I just want
I
to
think if on another note, if you or anyone wants to put my name, if they put Anthony Lanzilotti into YouTube, I believe it should still be there. The actual protest,
I'm
a
gonna do
video of
that.
it.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna do. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that. And I think there is such a lesson in that for people with disabilities because I did not have the same experience you did at ACC. I had a different experience entirely. Like if somebody told me, did they ask me, is there any discrimination against people with disabilities? I would have said no, but that's because I didn't have your disability. I always tell people this who have disabilities. Sometimes they'll go to a place or a restaurant and they'll go, "Oh, this place is accessible." Well, yeah, it could be accessible for you with a disability, but is it accessible for somebody who's hard of hearing or somebody who's blind or visually impaired? Or if Anthony's in a situation, he could be in a situation where he's like, "Oh, this is pretty easy to navigate." But what about if Donald came with his electric wheelchair? It wouldn't be easy to navigate.
Yeah.
So I just think it's important that people with disabilities look out for each other and understand that
Absolutely.
their disability isn't the only disability. Like it's not the only experience. So I am gonna go on YouTube and, and look it up. Look it up. So
I believe it's been a while since I gotta be honest, it's been a while since I've went back and looked
I'm
at it, but
sure-
it should still be there.
I'm sure that was a fun day for you, Anthony. I'm sure you had a good time.
It was a windy day, but yeah, it was a good day.
That's awesome, though. Yeah, so I just think this is a great conversation, and we'll wrap it up.
Would you like to do one of these again?
Yeah, we could. I would love to. Well, there's so many issues we could talk about. We could talk about work and housing. We can definitely do a whole disability episodes covering topics, and I think that is something we should definitely do. But for now, Anthony, just give everybody again your number and if they're want to get involved in the South Jersey chapter for the blind. And it's important to note, Anthony, you don't have to be blind to be a member of the chapter,
Absolutely.
South Jersey chapter for the blind.
No, that is not a requirement. Everyone's welcome. I can be reached at 609-361-3038. My email is tti777@gmail.com. Do you want to give the info for the SIL?
Yeah, I hope most of you have it because you're on the Atlantic Still podcast. But from our number, 609-742-2253, you could reach me at extension 5, and you could reach us just by Googling Atlantic Center for Independent Living, and also on Facebook, Atlantic Center for Independent Living, on Instagram, Atlantic Center for Independent Living. We don't have a TikTok yet. We're not that cool. So we apologize if you look for our TikTok.
I haven't used that yet.
Yeah, I know. I feel every time like I feel like I just got on Instagram. But yeah, I guess that's the sign of us getting old, Anthony. All right, everybody. Thank you all for joining us, and see you on the next episode of the Atlantic South podcast. Bye, Anthony.
Bye-bye.